Hey there! Picture this. Payday finally comes. You check your paycheck and wait, where did a third of it go? Income tax. Most of us are used to that little gut punch every single month. But now picture living in a country where that never happens, where your entire paycheck, every single dollar, stays in your pocket. Sounds like a fantasy, right? Well, it's real. Countries like the UAE, Qatar, Monaco, Bahrain, and the Bahamas charge zero income tax. Zero. Meanwhile, in some countries like Denmark or Belgium, people hand over more than half their paycheck to the government. So how do these tax-free countries pull this off? How do they build roads, run hospitals, and pay teachers without taxing income at all? Is this some kind of trick? Are they secretly broke behind the scenes? And could you actually pack your bags, move there, and live completely tax-free forever? In this video, we're breaking down exactly how countries survive without income tax, who really benefits, and whether this model could ever work anywhere else. Let's get started. Section 1. What does no income tax actually mean? First things first, no income tax does not mean no taxes at all. It specifically means the government doesn't take a direct cut of the money you earn from your job or your business profits. But that doesn't mean everything else is free. Most of these countries still collect plenty of revenue through other types of taxes. Things like VAT, which is a tax added to almost everything you buy, import duties on goods coming into the country, and various fees on businesses, property purchases, tourism, and even visas. So when someone proudly says, "I live in a country with no income tax," they're usually still paying taxes constantly, just not directly out of their salary. Think of it like a restaurant that advertises a free appetizer, but quietly charges extra for drinks, service, and dessert. The total bill still arrives. It's just structured so you don't see the biggest cut coming out of your paycheck specifically. Let's say Bob moves from New York to Dubai for a tax-free job. His paycheck arrives 100% intact for the first time in his life. But then he buys groceries and notices a 5% VAT tacked onto everything. He renews his visa and pays a hefty government fee. He rents an apartment and notices the landlord passes along a municipality fee. Bob isn't being taxed on income, but money is still quietly leaving his pocket in other directions. Now that we understand what no income tax really means in practice, the next question is, if governments aren't taxing salaries directly, where does all their money actually come from?
Section 2. Where does the money come from? Governments still need billions, sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars every year to function. Hospitals, schools, roads, military, and public salaries don't pay for themselves. So if income tax isn't filling that gap, there has to be another massive source of cash. It turns out most no-income tax countries fall into one of three categories. The first is resource wealth. Countries like the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Brunei are sitting on enormous oil and gas reserves. Selling that oil and gas to the rest of the world brings in so much revenue that the government simply doesn't need to tax its own citizens at all. In fact, in some of these countries, oil money alone can cover roads, hospitals, free education, and government salaries, with plenty of surplus left over to invest abroad through massive sovereign wealth funds. The second category is finance and tourism. Tiny nations like Monaco, the Cayman Islands, and Bermuda don't have a drop of oil, but they attract enormous wealth by becoming financial hubs and luxury destinations. Monaco earns huge revenue from casinos, luxury real estate sales, and the registration fees wealthy residents pay just for the privilege of calling Monaco home. The third category is corporate and offshore fees. Places like the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, and Vanuatu make much of their money by letting international companies register there for banking and licensing purposes, charging hefty annual fees without ever taxing the income of actual residents. So, in short, these countries didn't eliminate government revenue. They simply replaced income tax with a different, often far more concentrated source of money. Now, let's look at a few of these countries individually, because the way each one actually funds itself is pretty different.
Section 3. Case studies. Let's start with the United Arab Emirates.
The UAE earns the bulk of its historical revenue from oil exports, but it's been smart about diversifying away from oil dependency. Dubai, in particular, transformed itself into a global tourism, trade, and business hub, attracting foreign companies with zero income tax as a massive incentive to set up shop. Companies flood in, bringing jobs, real estate demand, and constant spending, which keeps the economy thriving even as oil becomes a smaller slice of the overall pie. Next is Qatar. Similar story, except Qatar's natural gas reserves are so massive relative to its tiny population that the government can essentially fund the entire country's needs from energy exports alone. With around 3 million people sharing that wealth, there's simply no real need to tax salaries when the gas fields are doing all the heavy lifting. Then there's Monaco. Tiny, with no oil and barely any land at all, Monaco thrives because it deliberately positioned itself decades ago as a haven for the ultra-wealthy. Wealthy individuals move there, buy some of the most expensive property on earth, and pay massive registration and residency fees just for the privilege of living there. With property prices reaching tens of thousands of dollars per square foot, the government collects plenty just from real estate transactions and luxury spending alone. And finally, the Bahamas. The Bahamas earns most of its money from tourism and offshore banking. International companies register there purely for favorable tax treatment, paying ongoing licensing fees, while millions of tourists pour money into hotels, resorts, casinos, and excursions every single year. So as you can see, there's no single formula here. Each country found its own unique combination of resources, geography, and strategy to replace income tax with another steady stream of revenue. But here's the real question everyone actually wants answered. Is this genuinely tax-free for everyone who lives there?
Section 4. Is it really tax-free for everyone? Not exactly. While locals and qualifying residents often do enjoy zero income tax, that doesn't automatically mean life there is cheap or easy. In many of these countries, the cost of living is extremely high, specifically because the government needs to make up that lost income tax revenue from somewhere else. Housing in Dubai or Monaco can be absurdly expensive, sometimes rivaling or exceeding the most expensive cities in the world. VAT on everyday goods, fuel, and services can quietly chip away at your savings every single week. And many of these countries enforce strict residency rules. You usually can't just show up, rent an apartment, and declare yourself tax-free overnight. You may need to invest a significant amount of money, purchase property above a certain value, or maintain a minimum number of days physically living there each year to qualify. There are also hidden costs that most people don't think about until they move. Things like business licensing fees, work visa fees, health insurance requirements, and yearly renewal costs that quickly add up. So while you genuinely won't see income tax deducted from your paycheck, the money still leaves your pocket in other, less obvious ways throughout the year. It's less about magically avoiding taxes altogether, and more about trading one familiar tax system for a completely different, and sometimes less visible, one.
Section 5. Could every country do this? If it works so well for the UAE, Qatar, and Monaco, why doesn't every country just scrap income tax entirely? The honest answer is, most countries simply don't have the resources to pull this off. The UAE and Qatar can do this because they're sitting on oil and gas reserves worth trillions of dollars, shared among relatively small populations. Monaco can do it because it's tiny, already wealthy, and deliberately attracts a concentrated group of ultra-rich residents who are happy to pay enormous fees just for the prestige and lifestyle. Most countries don't have oil reserves of that scale, don't have a population small enough to comfortably support itself through tourism alone, and don't have the geographic appeal or infrastructure to become a luxury haven for billionaires overnight. Imagine a country like India or Indonesia with well over 1 billion people and no comparable oil wealth per citizen, trying to fund hospitals, schools, defense, and infrastructure without any income tax at all. There simply wouldn't be enough alternative revenue in the world to cover that enormous gap. So the no income tax model isn't secretly a better system that every government is just too lazy or corrupt to copy. It's a very specific setup that only works under very specific conditions: a small population,
massive natural resource wealth, or a unique geographic and economic position that lets a country attract enormous concentrated amounts of money from outside its own borders. Conclusion. So, no income tax doesn't mean no taxes, and it definitely doesn't mean it's free to live in these countries. It just means the government found a different, often more concentrated way to collect its money, whether that's oil and gas, tourism, luxury real estate, or offshore business fees. For most countries on Earth, replicating this model just isn't realistic. The resources, population size, and geographic conditions simply aren't there. So next time someone casually says, "I'm just going to move somewhere with no income tax," you'll know it's not quite as simple as it sounds. It's not about escaping taxes altogether. It's about trading one system of paying the government for a completely different one. And that trade isn't available to everyone equally. If you want me to break down exactly how tax havens work for individuals and giant corporations specifically, let me know in the comments below. If you want me to make other videos explaining these kinds of topics, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.